Good evening, you're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. In a little while from now, approximately half an hour, the Prime Minister will be presenting India's formal position on climate action at the massive International Climate Summit. It's called COP26. It's being held in Glasgow in Scotland. Mr. Modi has delivered a statement will be delivering a statement alongside other world leaders. Now, this is an absolutely critical summit at stake, saving the globe from irreversible change, which will take place if global temperature rise is not contained to 1.5 degrees. The big question, who is going to invest the trillions needed to ensure that countries around the world have the technology and the ability to fund and imbibe the clean technologies needed to cut down on deadly carbon emissions? Well, the US President Joe Biden spoke approximately 10-15 minutes back. Let's listen in to what he said and what his message was at COP26.
This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example. We want to do more to help countries around the world, especially developing countries, accelerate their clean energy transition, address pollution, and ensure the world we all must share a cleaner, safer, healthier planet. We have an obligation to help. God bless you all, and may God save the planet.
Well, joining us now, Sunita Narayan, Director for the Centre for Science and Environment. We're also joined by R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow at TERI and a former Special Secretary, and Apurva Mitra, Head of Climate Policy at WRI India. Thank you all very much for being with us. Sunita, let me come to you first. A lot of people would be asking, how does this affect us? Why should we care? What is your answer?
Well, Vishnu, we are already seeing impacts of climate change. There is no doubt India is a very vulnerable country. We don't need science anymore to tell us that climate change is here. We are seeing extreme weathers. We are seeing extreme rain. We have intensification of cyclones. And the worst we need to recognize is the poor in our country, poor across the world. It's not just India. They are victims of climate change. They have not contributed to the stock of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere, and they are the worst victims. But it's not just the poor countries or the poor, but it's also affecting the rich. And remember the insecurity of the poor, the fact that you are going to see more and more devastation in the homes of the very poor. You will lead to more insecurity domestically and internationally. So I think climate change truly is not just an existential threat, as President Biden said, but it's also the biggest call on this generation to understand that we live in an interdependent world and that we must fix this in a way that we can fix it for all, which we are not doing. So let's be very clear about it. The world is way off target when it comes to meeting climate goals, and there is huge agenda for Glasgow to get it right.
Mr. Rashmi, what are you disappointed by the fact that G20 leaders yesterday, while reaffirming their commitment to fight climate change, didn't agree to a fresh date by which they were certain or they were sure that they would be able to ensure or guarantee that a temperature rise would be restricted to within 1.5 degrees?
No, I'm not disappointed, because there is a global goal of 2 degree or 1.5 degree stabilization. It was just question of reaffirming 1.5 degree as the only goal. 2 degree goal is already enshrined in the Paris Agreement, and all countries are committed to this. The only difference is that the impacts are a little lesser if we agree to 1.5 degree climate stabilization. But that's a matter of statistics. The impacts are actually there already, and impacts are deepening. So the issue is that of evolving a strategy where we can actually stabilize the climate in the near time frame and not in 2050. We can't wait that longer. So we need to enhance the targets of all the countries. Joe Biden was talking about clean energy transition in developing countries. I would say that the clean energy transition should take place in all the countries, including the developed countries. they should set the examples
Sure.
of actually how the clean energy transition
Okay, we'll talk about the clean energy transition in a moment, but I just want to go back a little bit into the point that you're mentioning and ask Apurva Mitra this, again for the benefit of our viewers, 1.5 degrees temperature stabilization, or do we have the luxury to let it go up to 2 degrees?
Thanks, Vishnu. Let me start by saying this COP26 is a sort of pivotal moment for us to build sort of confidence in our collective ability to solve challenges, and also renew the sense of spirit of solidarity between countries. 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, both these temperature changes will impact a lot of countries in this world. And as per the latest report of the IPCC, we know that it will impact all countries. Right, and we have seen in the very recent past how it has impacted every region of the world. It will impact some countries more than others. The difference in 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, it will be very pronounced in certain countries and less pronounced in others. And so I think collectively we need to think about the developing countries, the most vulnerable countries, and how this difference in the temperature target will disproportionately impact certain countries compared to the others.
We're also joined by Junaid Ahmed, Country Director of the World Bank India. I'll come to Junaid in a moment, but Sunita, I just wanted to again just belabor this point a little bit longer. At the present rate of temperature rise, when would we breach 1.5 degrees and when would we breach 2 degrees?
So at current rate of see, Vishnu, it's a linear connection. The more you emit, the more temperatures rise. So it's a very it's a linear equation. Now, based on today's emissions, we will exhaust the complete budget, carbon budget that is available to keep the world below 1.5 degrees by the end of this decade, which means in the next 9 years, Vishnu. Okay? So we need to understand the challenge and the scale of the crisis. And I do differ slightly, though it's very rare for me to differ with Rashmi ji, but I do differ with him on this. The fact is, there is going to be, we are today at about 1.09 degree temperature rise since 1870. Okay? 1.09. That's the temperature rise we have today. And we are already seeing the kind of catastrophic impacts that are shaking the world over. Okay? 2 degrees is something that scientists are increasingly finding, all their models are showing is going to be much worse, much worse. So it is not something that we have the luxury of time to be able to say, oh, we can wait for 2 degrees and that we have enough budget. I think the point that Rashmi ji is making is that in this limited carbon budget, remember we have only 400 gigawatts of CO2 left in the entire world if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees. And as I said, we will exhaust it in the next 9 years. The appropriation is complete. In the 9 years, 7 large polluting countries plus China would take up 70% of the available budget. So the question in front of Glasgow is, what happens to the rest of the world?
Sure.
And I think that's what we should be discussing rather than saying, oh, we have a 2 degree and we can move, we can have a higher budget. Because everybody would like, Vishnu, who doesn't want a bigger budget?
No, Sunita, I get the point you're trying to make. But, I'm just trying to ask this because a lot of people don't get it. 1.5 degrees, oh, big deal. 2 degrees, oh, sometimes summers are a bit warmer. It's much more complicated than that. And I think you've explained that. Junaid Ahmed, let me come to you. Let's dwell now on the issue of who pays. The argument of India and so many other developing countries in the world is that developed countries have used the benefits of their industrial revolution and after that to pollute the atmosphere, get us to where we are, and have gained the yields of that financially, economically. We are in a position in India and in other developing countries where we don't have that luxury. There is technology, but it's prohibitively expensive. Who pays for that? Yesterday, India seemed to suggest that we aren't in a position to pay for it even for ourselves, and that if we move, say, to nuclear, then we need to be part of the nuclear suppliers group. So a basic question: who should pay for the developing countries?
Vishnu, let me say that the name of the game is leveraging. And let me give you a quick example. The World Bank invested $600 million in solar rooftop with SBI, the State Bank of India. At that time, we only had 500 megawatts of solar rooftop. Today, we have 7,500 megawatts of solar rooftop and a market of $5 billion. So $500 million leveraged into $5 billion if you get the storyline right. So the key will be, how do we leverage the capital markets? Huge amounts of money in the capital markets. Going back to your question, I think the grand bargain that must be struck in COP26 or thereafter is, can you get the G7, can you get the developed world to come into a storyline where they are putting some money down, which can be leveraged into the type of multipliers that I just talked about. I'll give you another quick example of India. The money that was spent in Rewa, the Madhya Pradesh solar park, was only 20 million from the World Bank, but it produced electricity at the lowest price and now feeds 60% of the energy needs of Delhi's metro. It's again the concept of leveraging. So your question, who pays? I think the question is, can we get enough development assistance in the game to do leveraging? And the leveraging that I would argue is, can one put in the guarantees into multilateral lending, so multilateral lending can work with the development finance of nations like India to leverage multiple folds the capital markets.
Mr. Rashmi, India continues to invest in the coal sector, and some would argue that there is no choice because we have to fuel, literally fuel, our economy and our billions. Now, that doesn't make any sense from an environmental standpoint. What is the solution, therefore, for India?
I agree absolutely that coal is a very important question which we need to address. But coal, all our modeling, energy modeling and all kinds of modeling suggests that coal is going to stay for a pretty long time unless we have access to alternative sources of energy in India and rest of the world as well. So our primary focus should be on evolving alternative sources of energy in the immediate time frame. And we need to leapfrog here with all kinds of possible technologies and financial mechanisms here. So the one solution is that we move to nuclear energy, which I think the environmentalists would not favor that kind of approach. But we need to leapfrog to clean hydrogen. And we need to invest, we need to create global platforms in terms of technology and financial support, which can fast track the development and deployment of this technology, so that the coal, the real issue of base load, which the Minister Piyush Goyal was talking about, this issue can be tackled. Without tackling this fundamental issue of the base load power in the system and also the storage of the energy from renewable sector. We might be able to scale up the renewable energy, but unless we store it, either in terms of clean hydrogen or hydro, we will not go anywhere in terms of phasing out the coal in the near term. So that is a technological question, also a financing question, because the coal is a stressed sector. We need, Mr. Ahmed was talking about leveraging finance. I think apart from leveraging, we also need to ensure that the cost of capital for the renewable energy sector goes down. This is not happening. The entire finance for clean energy is coming only from the domestic sector. And the primary cause is that the cost of capital is not falling, even from international sources. So we need to create appropriate financial mechanisms for that purpose. We need to act on both these accounts.
Okay. Apurva Mitra, what are some of the key technologies beyond clean hydrogen or green hydrogen that we need to be looking at to introduce realistically and safely in our country to eventually work towards replacing coal? The word eventually is bad because we need to start replacing coal now.
Right. I think we're on a very ambitious pathway in renewables. And the Prime Minister announced the 450 gigawatt target in a recent summit as well. Going beyond this, we need to not just think about solar and wind, but think beyond with other renewables as well. We need to form a greater link with Make in India going forward. Our transition in the solar sector has been so fast, it hasn't allowed for manufacturing capacity to grow at the same pace. So any new technology that we take up, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's renewables, we need to be able to eventually reduce our dependence on imports. There are definitely a lot of different technologies, some that, for example, in terms of battery technologies, we need to build a base of battery technologies to be able to incorporate larger amounts of renewables in the grid going forward. And essentially, that is what will decarbonize it. There are a lot of hard-to-abate sectors. So, for example, freight or in industry,
Yes.
where you need to replace feedstock. That is where hydrogen could also play a very important role. The government is thinking of aggregating demand. And that could sort of drive demand in these sectors and lead to greater implementation. Whether it's in renewables and other sectors, we have seen in the past, the government has played a very important role in driving the transition. Apart from global prices of renewables falling, like Mr. Rashmi said, it's not falling fast enough. But the government of India, through its policies over all of these, since 2008, for example, for the solar sector, and before that for the wind sector with things like GBI or accelerated depreciation, has played a very important role in driving the transition.
Okay. Junaid Ahmed, how has India been, it's not all bad news, how has India been an outperformer when it comes to investments and shifting to solar energy?
Well, I gave you the example of solar rooftop. I gave you the example of the solar parks. But I think we need to look beyond just the energy story. If you look at public transport, there's quite an interesting revolution that's going on. The corridor, the freight corridor, as they begin to function, will take freight out of the roads onto rail. And that's going to have a huge impact on lowering the greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, as India invests in internal waterways, that too is going to make a very big impact. Also look at the whole issue of energy efficiency and energy management that's coming in. EESL, the Energy Efficiency Services Limited of India, has used its scale to procure and drive down prices, for example, of LED. Today, there's a huge market of LED lights that is really being created internal to India. That's another example of the type of gains that India is making. The movement to the 450 gigawatts is an extraordinary movement. If India pulls that off, it is going to help the climate transition of the world. And I do agree with what the commentators that are saying, that the price of renewable needs to come in. But mind you, the price of renewables has now come down so low that it's driving coal out of the market. I would say that if we did nothing else, coal will be out of the market within a few years. We now need to invest in the transition out of coal because coal is becoming non-competitive. So there's a real revolution that's happening in the renewable energy technology that we're seeing across the world. A final point, which often is missed: if India achieves its development transitions from low middle income to high middle income in areas of energy, urban, transport, agriculture, if it achieves its development transition as it is focused on, it will make a big impact on the world's climate transition. And that's why the world needs to invest in India's development transition. This is the grand bargain that must be struck in COP26. I think it's way beyond the NDCs. If India, Indonesia, South Africa begin to present their development transition, which will be taking them up the scale into middle income, and the way they're doing it today, it'll change the climate transition of the world. And I feel that argument is not being put forward in COP26. That's the grand bargain that we should strike for.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. We'll get to know a little bit more about India's strategy in the next half an hour or so when the Prime Minister will speak. But as we wrap up this bulletin, again, thanking our guests a lot, I just want to go through a couple of questions which have been asked. These are questions posed to us on Coup. Dilkashan writes, don't you think developing countries are making sensible efforts or more sensible efforts than developed ones? A comment on Coup from Piyush Kumar, developed nations should make sustainable resources cost effective that can be scaled up to poorer countries. Well, that's what we have at this stage. Again, we expect the Prime Minister to speak in a little while from now, where he'll be setting out India's agenda. India has already started making it clear that it alone cannot pay for the transition that India requires to become more clean, and that there has to be funding available from developed countries. How much funding is needed? We'll take a short break. More coming.